So I've actually got two stories that I think are worth hearing, and they're both related to each other. Mike, my name is David. I used to work late nights at a gas station / convenience store out in the middle of nowhere. This was forever ago, which I'm only mentioning because it was back before every establishment had state-of-the-art security systems and cameras, covering every square inch of their property. It's not like security systems didn't exist, more so that it wasn't much of a priority. Plus, the owner was cheap. Right. But anyway, I didn't care because the job was laughably easy. The most difficult part of working there was honestly the owner. He legitimately had the mind of a goldfish. We had the same two arguments multiple times a week, and it was almost like this guy forgot what we argued about every time, because he'd constantly repeat himself and bring up things we'd already addressed. But whatever, here's everything you need to know. Most nights, it was just me in there from 11 p.m. to 7. Like 0 in the morning, and the place didn't see much traffic. That's about it. Anyway, one night, I'm pretty sure it was during the week, I was doing what I always did, leaning against the counter with a magazine in hand, trying to prevent the boredom from putting me to sleep. It was really late. I don't remember exactly what time it was, since the store had a remarkable ability to blend all the ungodly hours of the night into one lump of misery, but the store was dead silent. You know that faint buzzing noise those old fluorescent lights make? That was the only noise I'd heard in hours, and my brain had gotten numb to it, which I guess explains why I was so startled when the front door chimed. I looked up and there was a man walking in. He was this tall, 30-something looking black guy with an above-average build. My first thought was ex-pro athlete, but then I looked at him a little more closely. Here's the thing, and I can't overstate how jarring this was. He was quite literally covered in blood. Or, I guess it could have been red paint, but I knew it wasn't. It was everywhere. There was a huge splatter across his chest for one, not to mention the streaks on his face and arms. It was a cartoonish amount of blood, which is why my brain took so long to process it. It was one of those unique sights that paralyzes your brain for a few moments, because it doesn't fit any familiar category of lived experience. But what really got me were his eyes. They were just empty. I don't know how else to describe them. But there was nothing behind them. It legit looked like he was just walking into the gas station at 2:00 a.m. on any other night. He looked perfectly normal, like he was relaxed and almost bored. It was like he didn't even know he was drenched in what was very clearly blood. I'm describing all this in vivid detail so that my reaction makes sense. I don't want to come across as sympathetic loser. It was genuinely a terrifying situation. I was completely frozen, and all I could do was stare at the guy, which was probably the last thing I wanted to be doing. I couldn't help myself. Every time I was able to look away, my gaze immediately snapped right back to his eyes. He noticed, obviously, which wasn't too surprising. I was quite literally staring at him. I'm not sure what I was expecting him to do, but I definitely was not expecting him to smile at me. And then he said, calm as anything, don't worry, it's not my blood, as if that was supposed to make me feel any better. It didn't. My brain immediately started the emergency alarms, that this guy is a murderer. He might have just killed someone. He might kill me. Those were the only thoughts running through my brain, and I was freaking the fuck out. But then my survival instincts kicked in, and I started acting like everything was normal. I nodded at him, like he had said something normal about the weather, and I buried my head back in the magazine. I watched him walk through the aisles, like nothing was wrong. He grabbed some random stuff and came up to pay. I was actually kind of surprised that he wasn't gonna just steal the items. I probably would have let him. I rang him up, careful not to look him in the eyes. The nightmare was almost over. He paid in cash, didn't say anything else, and left. The door chimed and he was gone. As simply as that. The second I heard a car engine start somewhere out in the parking lot, I grabbed the phone and called 911. I told them what I saw and I tried to describe the guy as accurately as possible. I told them I didn't really know what had happened, but I was positive that something happened. The dispatcher was asking some clarifying questions when everything went sideways. I was mid-sentence when the door chimed again. Great. Another customer. That was the last thing I wanted to deal with. But I was wrong. It wasn't another customer. It was him again. The guy I was in the middle of reporting to the police. He looked absolutely furious. I hung up the phone as fast as I could, but it was too late. He knew what I was doing. He must have seen me through the window. He stormed up to the counter and started demanding to know if I called the cops. I denied it, but he wasn't buying it. Not even a little. Things escalated quickly. He started cursing at me, telling me to mind my business and that he knew I was lying. I just put my hands up and didn't say anything, trying to defuse things as best I could. But there was nothing I could do. His voice was getting louder, and those empty eyes were suddenly filled with rage. At first I thought he was just gonna yell at me, but I saw it a second too late. He jumped across the counter and attacked me before I could do anything. I don't mean he climbed over it. I mean he lodged himself across the counter and tackled me to the ground before I could even react. In all of 2 seconds, he went from screaming at me to strangling me, and I was fighting for my life. I thought I was gonna die. I had never been in a physical altercation before that night, and I was certain this guy was trying to end my life. I thrashed around wildly, kicking, scratching, biting, even. I was just trying to survive. I could feel his blood, or whoever's blood it was, all over me, smearing my clothes and face. We were still rolling around on the floor when I resorted to my final option. I screamed that I had a gun and I wasn't afraid to use it. A complete bluff, of course. Something about the way I said it must have been convincing though, because he stopped punching me. He scrambled off and bolted for the door. I was still on the ground in a painful haze when I heard his car speed out of the parking lot. I didn't even get up at first. I just laid there for a while, covered in a mix of someone else's and my blood. The police showed up maybe 10 minutes later. When they saw the state I was in, they immediately left and tried to track the guy down. I never heard from them again. There was nothing about it on the news either, so I was completely in the dark. The experience was by far the scariest physical thing that has ever happened to me. Okay, if you thought that was crazy, I promise you this one's worse. A few months after the first incident, I was still working at the same gas station, which was probably my first mistake considering what happened. But I needed the money. Also, there was a part of me that had convinced myself it was just a freak occurrence, a one-time thing that had no chance of ever happening again. But that's not the case. It was another late night when the next thing happened. Looking back, the circumstances surrounding the night were pretty much identical to that of the first incident. It was a late night, I was alone in the store, dying of boredom, etc. So anyway, this guy walks in the store and immediately catches my eye. The first strange thing I noticed was that he was wearing a suit, and not just any suit. This thing looked expensive. It was dark gray and perfectly tailored. He had no business being anywhere near a gas station past midnight dressed like that. My first thought was that he must be coming from a wedding, or maybe some kind of corporate event. I mean, there had to be some kind of explanation for what he was doing. But even important people don't walk into gas stations in the middle of nowhere wearing nice suits. Like, that just doesn't really happen. And I would noticed it before that night. The guy didn't browse or even so much as glance at the aisles. He clearly wasn't hiding his intentions, or just didn't care enough to. Instead, he walked right up to me. He didn't speak, or even look at me. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. At first I was beyond confused, but then I looked down at the picture and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a picture of that guy. That guy who had come into the store with blood all over himself and tried to kill me. The photo wasn't 100% clear, but I was sure it was unmistakably the same person. I tried to mask my surprise, but I don't think I did a good job. I kept my face glued to the photo, but I could feel the man watching me. He didn't say anything at first, and when I looked up to meet his gaze, He just stared at me like he was studying my face or reading my mind. I wasn't sure if he was expecting me to say something, so I didn't. It was painfully awkward. And then, after a really uncomfortably long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was surprisingly gruff, almost like he had just smoked a full pack of cigarettes. He asked me if I had ever seen that man before, and I immediately said I hadn't. It felt like the right answer, even if I couldn't explain it at the time. I just didn't want to get involved in any kind of illicit activity that was going on. And my gut was screaming deny, 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 deny. The guy didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with these cold, calculating eyes that I couldn't read. It was really unnerving, especially given what he was asking me about. The silence was excruciating, and with every passing second, I lost confidence in the believability of my lie. Still though, I wasn't budging, and I was still pretty sure I'd given a convincing answer. I won our little implicit standoff, and the guy finally reached down and picked up the photograph. As soon as he turned his back, I let out a huge sigh of relief, thinking everything was over. I watched him walk through the store toward the door, but right before he opened it, he stopped and he turned back around to face me one more time. And then he just said, "I know you're lying." And then, before I could even respond, he was gone. I was pretty shocked by the whole encounter, more than I wanted to admit to myself. Being in that store all alone didn't feel safe anymore, and I didn't really know what to think. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what the hell had just happened. Who was that guy? How did he know about the first incident? I wondered if he was a cop or detective, or if he was something else entirely, someone connected to whatever that blood-covered man had been involved in. But that's the thought that really freaked me out. I pretty quickly reasoned that if he had been someone official like a cop, he would have revealed his identity to me, which could only signify bad news. I didn't end up calling the police that time, partly because I wasn't sure what I'd even say, and partly because of the PTSD over what happened the last time I called the police. Nothing happened for a while after that night, though I was a little shaken, yeah, and part of me was expecting something else to happen that night. But nothing did. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started thinking something might have actually been wrong. I started noticing the same silver SUV in various spots throughout my day. At first, it was parked across the street from the gas station during my daytime shifts, which was normal enough. But then I noticed it in the parking lot of the grocery store I went to, which was a touch stranger. Once I saw it on my street, the alarm bells started to go off again. I'm not a paranoid person by nature, but when you see the same vehicle in several different locations over the course of 2 weeks, you start to wonder. I had a feeling I knew who it was, and I told myself the next time I saw the car, I would call the police and report it as discreetly as possible. I knew it was that guy who had walked into the store that night in a suit. It had to be him. The worst part about it all was not knowing how he'd figured out where I lived. Somehow he tracked me down. You have to remember, I lived alone at the time. It's not like I had protection at home, or a lot of people to consult on this. I don't know why, but I convinced myself things would blow over if I just ignored it. And of course, that was an awful way to proceed. About 3 weeks after he'd first shown up, I was jerked awake in the middle of the night by the sound of glass shattering. My first reaction wasn't to freeze or flee, but to fight. I grabbed the baseball that I kept under my bed and ran into the living room. There was no one there, which I was able to determine in just a few minutes because the house was pretty small. There was something, though. There, sitting in the middle of the living room floor surrounded by broken glass, was a rock. Just a plain rock, maybe the size of a fist. There was no note attached to it, but I understood what it meant. In that moment, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. That guy had clearly been stalking me, and he was clearly involved in something awful and was trying to tell me something. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew I wanted no part of it. So I caved. I quit my job the next day and started looking for other places to live. It took me a little over a month to find a nondescript apartment a few towns over, and I figured that was good enough in that moment. I didn't see the SUV one time, but my mind was made up, and nothing happened after that. I was finally at peace, and I was actually able to find another job relatively easily. I ended up moving again, not even a year later, this time way out of state, and that was that. But I still think about both experiences from time to time, even though the first encounter was probably more life-threatening. It's the second one that gets me. I was never able to figure out why someone would go through all that trouble, stalking, harassment, intimidation, just because I'd called the cops on someone covered in blood. The only explanation I could think of was that he somehow thought I had a connection to that first guy and I was harboring him or sheltering him or something. It's been years, and I've accepted that I'll probably never figure out the truth behind any of what happened. This happened about 8 months ago. Like, the night in question, I was heading back from a job site about 3 hours from my house. I was beat. The job had taken longer than expected, and I didn't have the amount of caffeine in my system such exhausting work required. By the time I got back on the road, it was already past 10. I know a 3-hour doctor doesn't sound too intense, but I had been working so hard that even the simple task of keeping my eyes open was a chore. Plus, my truck is several years old. I don't drive a fancy vehicle with assisted driving or anything like that, so it's not like I had the comfort of knowing my car would help with the drive. About 45 minutes in, I knew I needed to stop. My eyelids were doing that thing where they just kind of drift down on their own, and I was having to physically shake my head to stay alert. So I pulled into the next gas station off the highway. It was around 11:00 at that point. I filled up my tank, smoked a cigarette, and kind of stood there debating what to do. I still had over 2 hours of driving ahead of me, and I knew there was no way I'd make it. So I made the decision to take a quick nap and finish the drive afterward. I drove to the corner of the parking lot and turned my engine off. I was just gonna go to sleep for a few hours right there. I slept in worse places. It didn't seem like a big deal. I was out almost instantly. When my alarm went off, it felt like I had blinked and an hour had passed. I still wasn't fully rested, but I was definitely more alert than before, which was good enough for me. The lot was completely empty now. There had been at least 2 other cars there when I pulled in, and they were both gone. Without as much as a second thought, I started my truck and pulled back onto the highway. Things were fine for maybe the first 20 minutes. The highway was dead and I was kind of zoning out, not falling asleep per se, but just letting muscle memory take over. I was essentially on autopilot. At one point, I realized my truck was making some strange noises. It actually took my brain a few minutes to process what I was hearing as abnormal. That's how zoned out I was. I turned the AC down so I could hear things more clearly. Wait, there was this faint thumping sound coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around a few times but didn't see any loose items bouncing around in the back seat or anything like that. I figured it was just something shifting around in the truck bed. One of my tools, maybe. Beyond speculating, there wasn't much else I could do. The situation didn't really warrant me pulling over, so I made a mental note to check it when I got back home, and I kept driving. The sounds continued, though. It actually started to bother me, and I ended up cranking the radio to drown it out. At one point, I slammed my hand against the hood of the truck and cursed out of frustration. Strangely, that seemed to work. For maybe 10 minutes after that, things were quiet. I was relieved, not because the noise was worrying me, but because it was genuinely ticking me off. The adrenaline from getting so worked up had woken me up a bit more, which was a good thing. But that increased alertness also cleared some of the brain fog, and I started thinking about how odd it was for a sound being made by an inanimate object to stop so abruptly as a result of my outburst. I had already eliminated the possibility that a faulty part in my truck had been making the sound, so the fact that slapping the hood could have caused it to stop was such a weird coincidence. I was in my head about it, debating whether I should stop or not, when out of nowhere, I heard a deafening crack come from directly behind me. It was not a normal sound, and it definitely wasn't a normal crack either. It was more like a crash, like someone had thrown a rock against one of my windows. The next 30 seconds were pure chaos and terror. I turned around in shock, and what I saw nearly made me lose control of my vehicle. There was a person standing in my truck bed, banging on the glass divider between the truck bed and the back seat with one of my tools. It was dark, but I could clearly see him. He was banging on the glass repeatedly, like a wild animal trying to claw its way out of a cage. The way he was moving was truly barbaric. I can't overstate that enough. I swerved uncontrollably, partly out of fear and partly to try and shake him off. I lost control of the truck and started spinning out of control. I genuinely thought I was going to flip, but all I could think about was the maniac who was trying to smash his way through the glass. I somehow managed to wrestle the truck back under control, and I skidded to a halt halfway between the right lane and the shoulder. I was too disoriented and terrified to think about how lucky I had been to avoid a wreck, and the moment my head stopped spinning, I ripped off my seatbelt. I don't know what came over me. I'm not the bravest person and I wasn't armed, but I knew I wanted to do something. I couldn't just sit there. I had to confront the psycho in the truck bed, if he was even still there. I threw the door open and ran around the truck. As I was approaching the truck bed, I saw a man in a hoodie climbing out. He jumped onto the ground and started running for the trio and off the side of the highway. I chased him for a few seconds before realizing that was a terrible decision. It was pitch black out there. I had no idea if he was armed, and we were completely alone. Wherever my bout of confidence had come from, it didn't last. In a matter of seconds, I was terrified all over again. I ran back to my truck and sped off without even looking back to see where that guy went. I drove for a little while and then pulled over again to inspect the damage to my truck. My brain was genuinely in shock. I couldn't think straight and I started to feel what I can only describe as a panic attack. I calmed myself down and got out of the truck. The glass divider was destroyed. It wasn't completely shattered, but there were so many cracks in it that one more forceful impact would have taken it out. I climbed into the bed of my truck to see what he had been hitting the glass with, but something caught my attention before I could even figure it out. There was a foreign object in there that I didn't recognize. It definitely wasn't a tool. It took me a few seconds to realize what I was looking at. It was a trash bag gag. It was wrapped over on itself multiple times, like someone had been trying to keep it really secure. And it was small too, like the size of 2 fists. It looked wet, and as I crouched down to get a better look, I realized it smelled disgusting. It smelled rancid, like rotting meat or food. I didn't want to touch it, but I needed it out of my truck. I needed to be as far away from that bag as possible. So as gingerly as I could, I grabbed it and quickly chucked it toward the tree line. I didn't give things another thought. I immediately got back in the driver's seat and started driving away. As I was pulling out, I looked down at my hands and realized they were tinted slightly red. The bag had been coated in something. Like something red. Something red that was now all over my hands. It was sickening, but there was nothing I could do besides drive. I rubbed my hands on my jeans and tried to just make it home without going insane. I ended up keeping the incident to myself. I didn't involve the police, and it wasn't until weeks later that I even told my friends about what happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter for days afterwards. I got a friend of mine to fix my glass a few days later without asking questions, and that was pretty much that before that met. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't affected by what happened. The only explanation that makes sense is that he climbed into the bed of my truck while I was asleep at the gas station, which makes sense because I don't have a bed cover, but he must have been lying completely flat there for most of the drive too. Otherwise, I would have seen him. I've never been in a life or death situation like that before. It was, by far, the most terrifying thing I've ever gone through. I'm using a voice transcription thing on my phone since I don't really like typing, And I'm not the best with words. This was, God, I don't even know, like 7 or 8 years ago now. Maybe 6. I'm not really sure. My life's been a bit chaotic since then, so my head's filled with all sorts of memories and whatnot. Anyway, this was New Year's Eve, back when I was still dating my ex, Duda. We were on our way back from a party when everything went down. It must have been well after midnight because I remember being extremely tired. Also, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that driving on New Year's Eve isn't exactly the smartest decision, but we had no choice. The party had been at Duda's friend's place, but we were late additions to the guest list, so there weren't any sleeping arrangements left for us. The drive was actually pretty long, maybe 30 minutes, give or take. The roads were pretty much empty, which I remember being grateful for. It had snowed earlier that day, so the streets were icy as hell, and honestly, the last thing I needed was to be dodging traffic on top of everything else. Duda was half asleep in the passenger seat. I had the heat cranked in some random rock playlist going, just to keep myself from drifting off. You know how it is. We were maybe 10 minutes from her place when it happened. Okay, so I don't even know how to describe what I saw. White. 1 second the road ahead was completely empty, and the next there was just a woman, literally standing in the middle of the street. And she wasn't like crossing or anything. She was just there, facing my car, like she'd been waiting for us or something. I remember my brain just not being able to process it fast enough. I was already slamming on the brakes before I even realized what I was looking at. And then I realized she was holding a knife. It was down by her side, this massive kitchen knife, the kind you'd use to, like, carve a turkey or something. My headlights were hitting her full on, and I could see her face was all twisted up, like she was crying or screaming, or maybe both. It was sickly. I don't think I've ever reacted faster in my life. I yanked the wheel to the right to avoid hitting her, but the second I did, she lunged at the car. I heard the impact before I understood what happened. Despite the chaos of everything unfolding so quickly, I knew exactly what happened. She had swung the knife at my car as I passed. Even though I had avoided her, the swerve combined with the ice was just too much. I felt the tires lose grip and suddenly we were spinning. Duda had woken up by then and immediately started freaking out. I was gripping the wheel like it would actually do something, but there was nothing I could do. The car was not under my control. We spun a full 180 and were basically facing the other direction by the time the car stopped. After recovering from the shock of almost dying, I looked up through the windshield and felt sick all over again, because we were now facing the direction we'd come from, which meant we were facing the woman. She was maybe 30 feet away, still holding the knife, illuminated by my headlights, like something out of a horror movie. And she was limping toward us, like she was trying to move fast, but she was clearly injured. She was also screaming something I couldn't understand, just this guttural, incoherent noise that sounded more like an animal than a person. It was, and probably still is, the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed with my own 2 eyes. I remember Duda yelling at me to do something, but I was just frozen. I couldn't look away from this woman lurching toward us. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was all matted and wild. I don't know if she was on drugs or having some kind of mental breakdown or what, but there was nothing behind her eyes. There was nothing there. It honestly looked like she was a dead person walking. She was maybe 15 feet away when my survival instincts finally kicked in. I threw the car in drive and slammed on the gas. The tires spun on the ice for this terrifying second before catching, and we started moving. I thought we were clear. I thought that was it. But of course, I was wrong. I don't know how she moved that fast. 1 second she was in front of the car, and the next she was on it. She threw herself onto the hood and I felt the whole car shudder from the impact. Duda was screaming, I was cursing, and this woman was clinging to the hood of my car with one hand while stabbing the windshield with the other, just over and over again. I felt like she was trying to get into my car and kill me. I felt like I was gonna die. I couldn't see or think. I just started swerving the wheel back and forth as hard as I could. The woman was sliding around on the hood, but she wouldn't let go. She was still screaming that horrible, wordless scream, and her face was inches from the glass. And I swear to God, her eyes were locked on mine the entire time. On the third or fourth swerve, she finally lost her grip. I watched her roll off the side of the hood and hit the pavement really hard before sliding into the shoulder. The car fishtailed again, but I managed to keep it under control this time. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her lying there. She wasn't moving. Part of me wanted to stop. I know that sounds insane given what just happened, but I thought maybe I'd killed her. Like, maybe she was just some mentally ill person who needed help and I just killed her. Dude grabbed my arm and told me not to stop. She was shaking and kept saying we needed to go, that it wasn't our problem, that we couldn't get involved. I said we should at least call the police, but she also shut that down immediately. She said the cops would blame us since we'd been drinking, and that there was no way they'd believe our story. She said we'd get arrested, or something. Looking back, none of that made sense, but Duda had this way of making everything sound urgent, yet logical in the moment. She was always like that, very persuasive and borderline manipulative, honestly. I left that woman on the side of the road, drove Duda home, and didn't tell anyone. I still feel sick thinking about it. The damage to my car wasn't even that bad, just the cracked windshield, the knife marks on my driver's side window, and a few scratches on the hood. Surprisingly, there wasn't even any blood on the car. I got it fixed, like, a week later. But the guilt stuck with me for months. I kept checking the local news, waiting to see a story about a body found on that road or a missing woman or something, but nothing ever came up. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse, honestly. Part of me wonders if she got up after we left and just walked off into the woods or something. Part of me doesn't want to know. The thing that really messed with me, though, was Duda. She acted like nothing happened. Like, within a couple days, she was back to her normal self, making plans, going out with friends, whatever. I brought it up once and she got annoyed with me, telling me I was being dramatic and that we did what we had to do. I remember just staring at her and thinking, like, how can you be so cold about this? A woman tried to kill us, and we might have killed her, and you're willing to just forget about the whole thing. We broke up a few months later for unrelated reasons. Well, mostly unrelated. But I'd be lying if I said that night didn't change how I saw her. Maybe I'm the crazy one, but an experience like that is not something you can easily forget, let alone move on from in 2 days. I might have ended someone's life that night. That deranged woman might have ended my life that night. That's not something you can just forget about. I went to Cal Berkeley for undergrad. It's where I met one of my closest friends, a guy named Garrett. His real name is Guo. But when we first met freshman year, he introduced himself by his, quote, American name, and it just stuck. He's originally from Hong Kong, came to the States to study computer science, and is genuinely one of the smartest people I've ever known. After grad, we went our separate ways geographically. I moved to New York for work, and he went back to Hong Kong for the same reason. We're both in our late 22nd now, both doing pretty well career-wise, both single. Wait. We try to see each other at least once or twice a year, whether that's him flying out to visit me or me taking a trip to Asia. I know it's pretty fortunate to be able to travel so frequently, so I never take that for granted. This incident happened last New Year's Eve, and I still think about it constantly. I've told a few people, but no one really knows what to make of it. Nor do I. Oh, by the way, Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. That means when it's midnight in Hong Kong, it's only 11. Like Sorrow am on December 31st in New York City. Garrett celebrates both the regular New Year and the Chinese New Year, so he was out partying that night. Same as me, just half a day earlier. I spent New Year's Eve with my two closest friends in the city. Ryland and Dari. We started at Ryland's apartment for drinks, then made our way to this rooftop party in Williamsburg that one of Ari's co-workers had invited us to. It was honestly pretty fun and decently upscale, at least for Brooklyn. The light. 30 or so, I started talking to this girl. She was standing near the bar by herself, and I honestly just walked up and introduced myself. We hit it off immediately. She had this energy about her that I can't really describe. Super easy to talk to, funny, engaging. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before she pulled me onto the dance floor. Her name was Maitre Yi. I remember asking her to repeat it because I'd never heard it before. She laughed and told me everyone just calls her Maitre Yi because that's basically how you pronounce it. I thought that was kind of charming. She pulled out a pen and spelled it for me on my hand, just in case I, quote, forgot. Things escalated quickly from there. We danced, talked some more, and kissed at midnight. By around 12:30, she asked if I wanted to get out of there, so we grabbed an Uber back to my place in the East Village. I'll skip the next few details, but I will say it was a great night. We stayed up talking for a while afterward, and I learned a decent amount about her. Here's everything I remember. She was originally from San Diego. She was an artist, more specifically a painter, and she mentioned she used to do graffiti and murals before transitioning to more traditional stuff. Her middle name was Mia, which was also the name of one of her cats. The other cat was named Cosmo. Her birthday was April 28th. Her best friend growing up was from some tiny town in Germany called Hiroshima. Her dad was a patent lawyer. These are random details, I know, but they become important later, trust me. At some point, she mentioned her clothes smelled like the bar, so I threw them in the wash for her. She borrowed one of my t-shirts to sleep in. We fell asleep not long after that. I can't remember really what time it was when I woke up the next morning. She was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave after hookups. It happens. I figured she slipped out early to avoid any awkwardness, which was fine. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. The first thing was my apartment door. I have a standard lock that you can only lock from the outside with a key, meaning it doesn't auto-lock. Like, when I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed the lock was still engaged, which meant either she had somehow locked it from the outside without a key, or she'd never left at all. But both of those were impossible scenarios. I checked the rest of the apartment. My place isn't big, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, a small kitchen. There's no second exit. The windows also don't open more than a few inches. I even searched my closet like an idiot, as if she might be hiding in there. But she wasn't. The impossibility of the situation made me start questioning my sanity. I started wondering whether my drunken state had caused me to imagine the whole encounter entirely. I kept pacing around my apartment frantically, as if she would just appear out of some corner and reset everything back to normal. Her clothes were also gone from the dryer, which added to the mystery, and the shirt I lent her was nowhere in sight, proving that she had slept over. But she was nowhere. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what the hell had happened, but no explanation I could come up with made sense. To make matters worse, I soon realized that I never got her number, or any form of contact at all, for that matter. For the rest of the day, I tried to piece together everything I could remember about her. The details I listed earlier, that's pretty much everything. I kept repeating them in my head because I knew I'd forget eventually. Later that afternoon, I randomly felt compelled to call Garrett. I don't know why exactly. It was just a super bizarre impulse that just kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't like I had anything specific to tell him. I just had this weird urge to ring him. We caught up for a bit, talked about work, talked about our respective New Year's celebrations, the usual stuff. He seemed a little off, though. Eventually, I asked him what was wrong. He sighed and told me he met a girl the night before. They'd hit it off, gone back to his place, and she left the next morning without saying goodbye. No number or contact or anything, and he was bummed about it. I left and told him the exact same thing happened to me, like the exact same thing. But here's where things get really freaky. He told me her name was Maitre Yi. Like, Maitre Yi. I felt this weird chill run through me. I asked him to describe her, and he started listing details. Everything matched up almost perfectly. Her birthday was April 28th. She was from San Diego. A painter who used to do graffiti. I cut him off before he could finish and asked if she had a cat named Mia. Wait, that's when he went a little silent before saying, yes. You could imagine what happened next. The two of us spent like 15 minutes just listing as many things as we could remember about her. And all of it lined up. It was actually kind of horrifying. It gets worse, though. He actually had pictures with her, something I didn't have, and he showed them to me. It was the exact same girl. I'm 100% certain. We tried to rationalize it, but every explanation we could come up with was ridiculous. And here's the thing, Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. Garrett met her around 11. Wait, 0 p.m. on December 31st, Hong Kong time. I met her at around 11:30 p.m. on December 31st, New York time. That's roughly a 12-hour difference. But a flight from Hong Kong to New York takes at least 15 hours. And it's usually longer, more like 16 or 17. Even if she had somehow gotten on a plane the second she left Garrett's apartment, she couldn't have made it to that rooftop party in Williamsburg in time. The math didn't work. It was literally impossible. And even if we ignore the flight time somehow, how would she have known to go to that exact party? How would she have ended up talking to me? How would she have known to use the same name, the same details, the same everything? I still don't have answers to any of these questions. Night. Neither does Garrett. We've talked about it probably a dozen times since then, and we always end up at the same place. We don't know what happened and we probably never will. Neither one of us saw that girl again. The thing that messes with me the most is how real it all felt. I know for a fact that she wasn't some drunken hallucination. I literally talked to her for hours. She slept in my bed and then she just vanished from a locked apartment with no other exits. Garrett and I don't really know what to do with this. We've both tried looking her up online, but Maitre Yi with no last name and only vague details about being an artist from San Diego doesn't exactly narrow things down. Wait, we found nothing. New Year's Eve is fast approaching, which is why this is all fresh in my head again. Usually, the insanity of crazy, unexplainable experiences fades over time, but for some reason, it feels like the opposite for me. The more time passes, the freak I are it is to think about the possibility that I may have slept with a ghost on New Year's Eve. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't have a better explanation for what happened. Night. This story is one of my dad's. Mike. Before he had kids, my dad and my mom used to travel a lot. He had made some smart business moves in his mid-22nd, so he had money to spend and the free time to spend it. They were both big skiers, but the only good skiing that was accessible to New York City was in Vermont. So over the years, they actually purchased a few lodges up there. The first one was in Ludlow. They bought it from some guy named Mr. Black, who lived on West End Avenue in the city. It was this old, black shuttered place that my dad always referred to as the Black House, partly because of the shutters and partly because of the previous owner's last name. They'd sell quarter shares to friends and cycle things out every few months to help cover the costs. They kept the place for a few years before eventually switching to a second property. The second lodge was about halfway between Ludlow and Rutland, right along Route 100 and what locals called the Lake District. There are like 5 lakes in a row along that stretch of road, and the house sat right on the edge of one of them. My dad's friend Victor and his wife, Lisa, went in on that one with them. Victor and my dad had been close since college, and the four of them would take trips up there together pretty regularly. This happened one New Year's Eve. I can't remember exactly what year, but it was obviously before I was born. Lisa and my mom were away for a friend's wedding or something. I can't really remember the specifics, but it's not that important. What matters is that Victor and my dad decided to take a trip up to Vermont by themselves to ring in the new year. It was the night of December 31st. The two of them were upstairs cracking a few beers and just catching up. The upstairs of that lodge had these full-length windows that looked out over the lake, so they'd sit up there, listen to music, and watch the snow. It was snowing, of course, but not so heavily that you felt trapped. My dad said it was really peaceful that night, one of those nights you share with a good friend where you're both just happy to be far away from everything. They had the radio on, waiting to hear the countdown from Times Square. And then, all of a sudden, things got crazy. They were mid-conversation when a huge flash of light came from somewhere across the lake. My dad said his first thought was fireworks, but the flash didn't come from the sky. It came from the ground up, and there was no sound, just a silent, blinding light. Victor stood up and walked over to the window, trying to make something out across the lake. My dad asked what he was looking at, and Victor said he thought he saw something moving out there. It was dark, obviously, but there was enough visibility from the snow on the frozen lake that you could see if you concentrated. So after a few seconds, Victor becomes convinced that there's a person out there. But my dad told him that was impossible. There were no houses on that side of the lake. There were no trails, no roads, no anything. It was just pure woods on the other side of the lake. But Victor wasn't having it. He started throwing on his coat and boots, saying he was going to take a look. My dad tried to talk him out of it, but Victor was already halfway down the stairs. My dad grabbed his jacket and followed. The two of them burst out onto the back deck, and that's when they heard a voice, a young voice. It sounded like a little boy yelling help, over and over again. My dad said it was faint at first, but unmistakable. There was definitely a child screaming for help somewhere out in that frozen lake. It had been well below freezing for months, so the lake was completely solid, no question about it. My dad said they didn't even think twice. They just started walking across. As they got closer, they could make out a figure standing on the ice, maybe 20 or 30 yards off the far bank. It was small, a kid for sure. My dad said he could see the shape of him against the snow. But then there was another flash. My dad said it was so bright he had to shield his face and drop to his knees. He couldn't see anything for a few seconds. Then, when he finally opened his eyes and looked up, the kid was just gone. There was nothing out there but empty ice and snow. My dad said that's when he and Victor went from curious to terrified. They turned around and started racing back toward the house. My dad said he was running as fast as he could without slipping. Victor was a few steps ahead of him when he suddenly yelled and pointed up at the house. He was saying there was someone in the window, but not an adult, a little boy. My dad looked up but didn't see anything besides the dark glass reflecting the snow. Victor swore up and down that he saw a kid standing right there, looking down at them. My dad didn't know what to say. He just wanted to get inside. They made it back to the house and searched the whole place, every room, every closet, every corner. But there was no one there. The doors were all locked and the windows were shut. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. They decided to call it a night after that. My dad said neither of them really wanted to talk about what happened. They just went to their rooms and tried to sleep. Neither of them had even noticed midnight come and go. My dad woke up twice that night. Both times he swore he heard a child laughing somewhere in the house. He lay there in the dark listening, but it always stopped before he could figure out where it was coming from. The thing that freaked him out the most wasn't the kid on the lake or the figure in the snow. It was the light, that bright, blinding flash that came out of nowhere. He said he and Victor talked about it for years afterward, trying to come up with some kind of explanation. Lightning, a flare, fireworks from some distant town, but nothing made sense. There was simply no source. It just happened twice and then it was over. They ended up cutting the trip short. My dad said they never talked about that night with my mom or Lisa. Not until years afterward, at least. My dad still doesn't know what happened out there. He's told me this story maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, and every time he gets to the part about the light, he just kind of trails off. I asked him once if he thought it was something supernatural, and he just shrugged and said he didn't know what else it could have been. I remember this night like it was yesterday, even though I'm 26 now and it happened when I was 12. My parents left me home with my 18-year-old brother, Zach, for the night. And at first, I was excited because it was just me in the big house, which felt like huge freedom at the time. Zach told me he was going out for a few hours with friends and made me promise not to tell mom and dad, which I agreed to because I trusted him. And also, why wouldn't I want the place to myself? He would get in huge trouble if my parents were to find out, and he knew that. At first, I thought it would be fun to be alone, especially on a weekend night. I ended up in the den, where I decided to watch a scary movie. At that age, while home alone, not the best idea, which I learned it the hard way. I had never been home alone for this long before, especially at night. And honestly, halfway through the movie, I started getting scared. Not entirely because of the movie itself, but because of the way the house sounded. The random creaks in the floor, the wind brushing against the windows, even the fridge clicking on periodically. Every time the movie made a loud sound, I would flinch, and I would look over my shoulder to behind the couch to the half flight of stairs that led to the main floor, expecting to see someone there. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't know why I was subjecting myself to scaring the crap out of myself. I turned off the TV and ran upstairs to my room like a scared little kid running from imaginary demons that follow you the second you turn off the lights. When I got to my room, I went into the bathroom that connected both to my room and my parents' bedroom, where I brushed my teeth as fast as I could and tried to calm down. After that, I went into my room to play Call of Duty Zombies on my Xbox 360, thinking it would make me a little less scared. I played for a few hours, losing track of time and focusing on the game. Eventually, my team and I died on zombies and I got frustrated. I decided it was late and I should go to sleep. Though not long after that point, I felt the vibration of the front door closing, and I assumed it was Zach coming back. I lay there awake, listening to the sounds of my brother moving around downstairs, which was odd because usually when he'd get home, he'd go right upstairs to his room. But there were weird sounds coming from downstairs for too long where it started getting unusual. They were subtle little footsteps, or indescribable thumps and thuds. I felt my stomach start churning a little. That stupid idea to watch that scary movie was really getting to me. I got up and went to the window to look outside, expecting to see Zach's car in the driveway where he usually parks, but it wasn't there. Wait. That's when the real panic set in. I had no cell phone at the time. I was only 12, so I had no way to contact my parents or Zach without leaving the bedroom and going to one of the house phones, which felt impossible at that moment. I quietly tiptoed to my bedroom door to confirm that it was locked, knowing that the lock could be unlocked from the other side with just a fingernail. I knew that if someone wanted to get in, they easily could. I looked around and decided the only safe place to hide was the small crawl-in closet built into the wall of my room. I squeezed inside, shut the door carefully from the inside, and tried to calm myself as I listened. It was at this point that I vividly remember hoping that I was just being overly paranoid and that it actually was Zach. Maybe he parked on the side of the house instead. Seconds later, I heard someone fumbling with the door trying to get in, and then moments later the door opened. The person was inside my room, and I had no idea who it was or what they wanted. I stayed completely still, listening to footsteps moving around my room, feeling the floorboards creak beneath the weight of someone walking, and hearing things being moved and shifted around. Every second felt like an eternity. I was terrified that the closet door could open at any second and I could be dead. I still prayed it was my brother, but I stayed quiet, barely breathing, and hoping that whoever it was would leave. I could hear them dragging something across the floor at one point, which made me even more nervous. I felt like hours had passed, though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, I heard footsteps receding and moving away from my room. I stayed in the closet for what seemed like forever, likely 2 hours, until finally, I heard Zach calling my name from across the house. His voice sounded urgent and pissed off, and a few moments later, he came into my room and called my name again. I stepped out of the closet, and the first thing he did was yell at me, asking what I was doing in there and what I had done to his room. It was this moment that confirmed to me that it was, in fact, not my brother who was in the house. I explained the situation as quickly as I could, still shaking and unable to stop my hands from trembling. Once he understood, we both got up and started looking around the house together. That's when we realized how bad it really was. Drawers had been pulled out, and some of our electronics were missing, including TVs and gaming consoles. It was clear someone had been through the house and had taken things that were valuable. Zach immediately called the police, knowing that this was serious, and we waited together, still on edge, checking doors and windows to make sure nothing else was taken. The police came and made a report, writing down everything that was missing and asking us questions about what happened. They told us they would investigate and that we should wait for our parents to get home. Wait. Zorro and my parents arrived. My dad was furious and went straight for Zach, smacking him square in the face for being such a careless idiot, not only leaving me alone, but leaving the front door unlocked. My mom checked on me, gave me a hug, and told me she was just glad I was safe. Zach was forced to pay monthly rent from that point on to slowly pay back for all the things that were stolen, and he was treated with extreme caution after that night. I, on the other hand, was not punished at all. I was just shaken up, terrified of what had happened, and the whole experience stuck with me for years. Every time I thought about it, I could feel the fear all over again, remembering hiding in that closet and hearing someone walking around my room, not knowing if I would make it out alive. It was by far the scariest experience of my life, and it has stayed with me even now. When I was just a child, not even in kindergarten, I lived with my grandparents. My mom and dad had just separated, and my dad worked in the next town over, so I saw him every weekend. My uncle, my dad's brother, also lived with us, so I was rarely ever truly alone. I was always told to never answer the door for strangers. It was a small, peaceful town where everyone knew each other. We had a neighbor who visited often to watch hockey, wrestling, or join family barbecues. I'll call him David. He was friendly with both my grandpa and my uncle. He often drank beers with my uncle and helped my grandpa with yard work or truck repairs. If my grandpa came home with a moose from hunting, he and David would haul it into the shed together. One night, I was briefly left home alone. My grandma was at bingo and had called for a pickup. My grandpa told me he was going to get her and asked if I wanted to come out. I refused because I was watching cartoons. He reminded me not to open the door for strangers, but he left. As soon as I saw the truck pull away, the house got quiet. Only a few minutes later, someone knocked at the door. I ran up and asked aloud who it was, and I just heard David's familiar voice identifying himself. I told him that my grandparents were at home, and he replied that he had just seen my grandpa leaving. I told him my uncle wasn't home either, and he said he had been talking to my uncle on the phone and knew he was out drinking at a friend's place. Then he asked to come in. I told him I wasn't allowed to open the door for strangers, and he insisted he wasn't a stranger since he was our neighbor and someone I already know. In my child mind, he was right, but I didn't understand why he would come over when my grandpa and uncle weren't there. I unlocked the door and opened it. David towered over me. He was obviously drunk, swaying, slurring, squinting with one eye. He stepped inside and put his hands on my shoulders as I backed up. I didn't feel alarmed yet because I had seen my uncle drunk many times. I told him he could wait in the kitchen while I went back to watch TV, but he would not let go of my shoulders. I tried to pull his hands off of me, but couldn't. His voice changed, filled with anger, and he said things that frightened me, though I can't remember the exact words now, only the fear that they put in me. He dragged me into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife. He pressed the tip against my belly and asked if I wanted to be stabbed. When I cried, he told me to quiet down, or he would cut my tongue or my throat. He dragged the dull side of the blade across my throat to show he was serious. Then I heard my grandparents' truck pulling in. Car doors closed outside. Relief flooded me and I was about to scream for help, but David clamped his hand over my mouth. He turned us both toward the doorway just as my grandma entered. Her smile vanished when she saw him holding me with a knife. She screamed for my grandpa to get inside immediately. "Mike!" My grandpa rushed in, yelling in shock and fury as he demanded to know what was happening. He took one look at David holding me hostage and charged forward, shouting at David with pure rage. David shoved me to the floor. My grandma rushed over, grabbed me tightly, and blocked me from seeing what was happening while telling me I was safe. I could still hear the struggle. Eventually, my grandpa overpowered him. When I finally looked up, my grandpa was shoving David out the door, yelling at him to never come back, and then slamming the door. As I grew up, I realized David had waited deliberately. He must have known my uncle wasn't home and that my grandma was at bingo. He had seen my grandpa leave. That was his moment. I was too young to understand his intentions. Years later, after my grandpa's funeral, when I was sitting with my grandma discussing memories, I brought up that night and how heroic grandpa had been. She looked uneasy. She said it was truly a terrifying night. She asked if I remembered that my grandpa went out hunting that same night. I faintly remembered him leaving, even though hunting at night wasn't something he usually did unless it involved camping. When I asked why he left, she claimed she didn't remember much before that night. It got me thinking. They never called the cops to press charges on him, and I never saw him again after that night. My grandpa was respected in the community. He was friends with, as well as went to the same church as some police officers, and was known to be a good hunter. No one would ever question if they saw a bloody tarp in the back of his truck and he was driving out of town late at night. This story happened a few years ago during spring break in 2020 when I was 15. I was home alone one night while my parents were out of town. I was just hanging out in my room when I got a call from one of my mutual friends from school, who I'll refer to as Mason. I don't usually get calls from Mason, let alone texts, or keep in touch with him. But I answered anyway. Before I could get a word out, he asked what I was doing. I told him I was just at home and wasn't up to anything. He then asked if he could drop off one of my buddies because he needed a place to stay for the night. This buddy of mine is someone I've known since 3rd grade, who I'll refer to as Neil. I basically told him I didn't feel like having company over and just wanted to chill by myself. After hearing this, Mason practically begged me to let Neil stay at my house. I could sense desperation in his voice as he pleaded with me to let him drop Neil off. I was still reluctant at first, but then Mason told me he'd let me use his weed pen if I let him drop off Neil. After he said that, I caved and told him they could pull up. Looking back, I realized how dumb I was to let something like that persuade me, considering what happened next. But I was a stupid potshot at the time, so what can you do? Neil has always been very outgoing, almost with zero filter, and he doesn't care what others think about him. So when I heard from my brother and other friends the week prior that he had started acting really weird in his classes, I didn't think much of it at first. I asked my brother to elaborate, and he told me that Neil would sometimes start laughing or clapping out of nowhere, even if the classroom was completely silent. And he would sometimes say very strange things to people for no reason, like claiming the basketball coaches were Freemasons trying to convert him. After hearing this, I realized Neil wasn't acting normal. And it wasn't until he and Mason arrived at my house that I understood how bad it really was. I met Mason and Neil at my front door and greeted them like any other day. I hit Mason's sweet pen as promised and gave it back. As Mason was about to leave, he grabbed Neil by the shoulders in a very serious way, tears forming in his eyes, and he pleaded with him not to do that thing. Neil looked at him blankly and casually responded that he understood before that night. I really should have asked what was going on, but for some reason I didn't, and I let Neil inside as Mason left. After I closed the front door, the first thing Neil asked me was whether all the doors in the house were locked. White. Red flags immediately went off in my head, and I knew I had just gotten into something bad. I told him they were locked and asked why. He asked me to check, so I led him down the narrow hallway by the front door to show that the back and laundry room doors were both locked. He didn't say anything after I confirmed it, and we stood in silence for a few seconds. Then out of nowhere, his hand shot up like he was raising it, and he put on this eerie, toothy smile that I can still see clearly in my mind. He held it for a few seconds before lowering his arm without saying a word. I forced a fake chuckle to make the situation seem less weird. Then Neil asked for some water, so we went to the kitchen. As I grabbed bottles from the fridge, I noticed him lingering by the drawer with silverware, including the knives. I watched as he slowly opened the drawer and reached for a steak knife. Without thinking, I ran over, grabbed his hand before he could take it, and slammed the drawer shut. Neil didn't react or move. He just stared at me and let out a chuckle, like he was pretending it was a joke. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears and I was frozen in fear. The kind of fear people describe in life or death situations. I had never felt like my life was in danger until that moment, and I could only focus on how I was going to get Neil out of my house. He finally broke the silence by suggesting we go to the park in the neighborhood day. I agreed as if nothing happened. We walked to the laundry room leading to the driveway, and I intentionally let him out first. I told him I needed to put shoes on, which I did. He paused and suddenly looked disappointed, telling me to hurry up. I shut the door, locked it immediately, and called my brother to explain what had just happened. After finishing the call, I grabbed every knife in the kitchen and brought them upstairs to my room. Keep in mind, I was stoned at the time, so my decision-making wasn't perfect, but I knew I needed to prevent Neil from forcing his way back into the house. My brother arrived with 3 friends in less than 5 minutes, and they met Neil outside. I stayed inside for a few minutes, nervous, then went out. My brother and friends were talking to Neil, who was rambling about the school's basketball coaches being in the Illuminati and claiming they would sexually assault the boys on the team to make them play. He continued talking nonsense for a few minutes. Then we decided to get him home because there was no way I was letting him stay under my roof after what had happened. One of my friends eventually took Neil home, even though he insisted he couldn't go because he believed his dad was going to kill him. After all of this, I called Mason to ask what Neil had said to him that made him act that way. And Mason explained that during the car ride, Neil had been reading a manifesto claiming he needed to kill himself or someone else to prevent his dad from trying to kill him. Mason had panicked and just wanted to get rid of Neil, which explains why he sounded so desperate to drop him off at my house earlier. After hearing this, I lost my mind and asked Mason why he would just dump Neil at my house without warning me, though I knew part of the fault was mine for not asking sooner. Later, it was revealed that Neil had taken drugs he shouldn't have, which triggered schizophrenic episodes and caused him to hear voices. About a month later, I told my mom the story and she was not thrilled, to put it lightly. Needless to say, I avoided something truly horrific that night by being on edge when Neil entered the house, and I still think about what could have happened if I hadn't paid attention to him in the kitchen. I was 10 years old when this happened. My mom had gone grocery shopping that day, and she asked if I wanted to come. I remember making a big stink about not wanting to. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and I just wanted to stay home and shoot hoops in the street. I told her nothing bad would happen and she would only be gone for a couple of hours. She finally gave in and let me stay. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed the old basketball from the garage and started shooting around in the street where we had a hoop set up. I shot around for a while, doing little games with myself, pretending I was down by one with a buzzer shot. I was sweating a little from running back and forth, and at one point, I stopped to catch my breath. I bounced the ball lazily and looked around the neighborhood. As I caught my breath, that's when I looked up toward the house. At the upstairs window, someone was staring down at me. It was only a shadow behind the glass at first, like someone was standing back from the sunlight. I stared for a good second or two before the shape shifted slightly, and I realized it wasn't some kind of trick from the sun. Someone was up there at the window, looking out at the street. None of my family was supposed to be home. My sister was at college, my dad was at work, and my mom was across town buying groceries. I dropped the basketball without meaning to. The window was my sister's room. The blinds were half open, and the figure was right behind them. I say figure because that's all I saw. No distinguishable features. I didn't know what else to do except run inside and see who was home. I ran around the side of the house and through the backyard gate. I burst inside and slammed it shut behind me. I yelled up the stairs, asking who was home. My voice cracked when I yelled it. For a second, I didn't hear anything. Might. Then, a voice answered from upstairs. Light. It said, Brad, come upstairs. It wasn't my mom, it wasn't my sister, and it wasn't my dad. It was deeper than any of their voices, but not deep like a grown man trying to sound scary. It sounded like someone trying to sound normal. I didn't go anywhere near the stairs. I ran straight through the house, grabbed the house phone off the kitchen counter, and sprinted back outside as fast as I could. I called my mom and told her someone was in the house, and she didn't believe me at first. She told me that's not something to joke about, and she said that she was almost done shopping. But I started basically crying into the phone, telling her I wasn't joking, telling her I heard someone call my name from inside in there at the upstairs window. She finally believed me when I started sobbing and begging her to come home. She said she was leaving the store right now. After she hung up, she must have called the police, because a cop car pulled up at the same time my mom's car turned into the driveway. She ran to me, asking where I saw the person. I pointed to the upstairs window. The police went in first. My mom followed them inside after a minute or two. I waited out front. I didn't want to go back in there. For 10 minutes, I just stood there staring at the upstairs window. No one appeared at it again. Eventually, one of those officers came out and told me it was safe to come inside. I went in and pointed upstairs to the room where I saw the man. They checked the closets, under the bed, behind the dresser. They even checked the attic. They checked every room in the house. They didn't find anyone or anything. After the police left, my mom started acting doubtful again. She said she believed me, but I could tell she didn't fully. She said if she found out I was messing around, I'd be punished for scaring her and wasting the police's time. I kept telling her I wasn't lying. She kept saying she knew, but her voice said something else. That night I had trouble falling asleep. I kept thinking about the voice and that shadow behind the blinds, but eventually I got tired enough to drift off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was still dark out, and at first I thought I woke up from a bad dream. But then I heard something in my room, just loud enough to wake me. I sat upright in my bed. My eyes were still adjusting to the dark, but I could see the outlines of my room. I could see my dresser, my closet door cracked open, my shelves. And across the room, not far from my bed, I saw something else. An unfamiliar shape. A tall, dark shape standing completely still. For a second I thought I was imagining it, but then the slightest movement made me realize what it was. It was a person. A full-grown person standing in my bedroom. I didn't even have time to breathe at me. I just screamed, a loud, broken scream that tore out of my throat. As soon as I screamed, the figure moved fast. It darted across my room into steps, grabbed my window, slid it open, and jumped out. I heard the man's feet land on the small awning below the window. Mike. My parents burst into the room as soon as I screamed. Mike. My dad ran straight to the window and looked out. Then he ran downstairs and out the back door to try to find whoever it was. I'm fairly certain he ran out there barefoot. He came back a few minutes later out of breath. He kept shaking his head and saying he didn't see anyone. They called the police again, but that time it was mostly just to file another incident report and for the cops to scout the area. We don't know how long he was in the house. All I know is he was inside during the day, long enough to know my name, and he was watching me from my sister's window. And he stayed in the house until nightfall. Like that, or he snuck in and out of the house through my bedroom window by climbing up on that awning up. Either way, he was in my room while I slept, standing there in the dark. Who knows what else he did while he was in the house? That's the scariest part.